All right, today we're going to talk some more about the hands of divinity. Okay, we're going to reconstruct some of these possible Minoan era creation myths, or these characters that seem tied to an earlier creation myth. Okay, so we're back to talking about the Curetes and Dactyloi. The Dactyloi seem to be the older version of this. Dactyl means fingers, so the Dactyloi are the fingers. And you can see that's translated here. This is Theoi, by the way, a great source. And then Curetes are youths. It translates as youths. Sometimes the dactyls are called Curetes. Sometimes the dactyls are said to be fathers of the Curetes. But, so here on Theoi, can't speak. Here on Theoi, the Curetes are called Dactyloi. They were 3, 5, or 9 rustic daemones, spirits. In some versions, Curetes show up on many islands of the Aegean in different versions. Some versions also have 7. So 3, 5, 9, or 7. Rustic spirits appointed by Rhea to guard the infant god Zeus in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete. So Rhea is mother of Zeus. She gives birth to him in a cave on Mount Ida. In other versions of the cave, in the story, she gives birth on Mount Dicte. So if you, let's take a look at Google Maps. So Mount Ida on Crete today is called Silerites. So here it is on Crete, and it's just southwest of modern-day Heraklion, which is Knossos, the largest city on ancient Crete. And then Mount Dicte is over here. I think it's called, Spathi is the modern peak of this range of mountains. So this would be Mount Dicte. So if you think about it, if you step back and just look at this. So outside of Knossos, you have 2 large mountains, Silerites or Mount Ida, Spathi or Mount Dicte. And these are the 2 largest mountains. Ida or Silerites is a bit larger. So in ancient times, you would have had competing cults, different temples, different priesthoods saying, no, Zeus was born here. No, Zeus was born here. But they're both large mountains outside of Knossos. So that's all you really need to remember with that. To keep the boy, Zeus, hidden from his cannibalistic father Kronos, they drowned out his cries with a frenzied dance of clashing spear and shield. So the dactyls or Curetes, they defend the infant Zeus. Kronos wants to devour his children. He doesn't want any of his children to grow strong and to possibly overthrow him on the throne of heaven. So the Curetes were gods of the wild mountainside, inventors of the rustic arts of metalworking, shepherding, hunting, and beekeeping. These were also the first armored warriors and gods of the orgiastic war dance performed by the youths of Crete and Euboea, or Eubea. In Greek, this is pronounced something else here. Yeah, so in English,
Eubea.
In Greek,
Evia.
The 5 dactyloi, or fingers, were usually regarded as identical to the Curetes. So different names, but related. These also had an equal number of sisters named Hecatarides, who together appeared to have represented all 10 fingers of the human hand. Dactyloi being the Greek word for fingers. The male and female dactyloi were also joined in marriage, perhaps imagined as a harmonious finger-to-finger folding of the hands, and from this union were born the rustic Satyroi, the satyrs, Oreades, Oreads, and the tribes of Curetes, the first Cretan men. So again, the dactyloi are sometimes called Curetes, or sometimes fathers of the Curetes. But the Curetes, when they're children of the dactyls, the Curetes are the first Cretan men. These younger Curetes were 100 in number. They married their sister Meliaea, the ash tree nymphs, and from their branches fashioned the first spears. Meliaea also shows up in the Argive family tree, the Argive genealogy. It's also a river in northern Greece. around the province of Thessaly. Maybe we'll get to that in another video, but it's tying these characters in with the Argive family tree. So that's something to think about. There's two major genealogies in Greece. The Hellenic family tree. The modern Greeks call themselves Hellenes, and they identify with that family tree. But there's an older, larger genealogy called the Argive family tree. And that's where the Meliae show up and many other characters. So this is showing, and in the Argive family tree, the kings of Crete appear. So, and they don't appear in the Hellenic family tree. So this is hinting to us that the Curetes, again, are envisioned by the ancient Greeks as being tied with a pre-Greek, a pre-Hellenic civilization. A pre-Hellenic tradition. The Curetes were closely identified with, if not the same as, a number of other rustic daemones, namely the Corybantes Evia, the Evian Corybantes, Corybantes Samothraki, the Samothracian Corybantes, the Cabiroi, a group of deities found at Samothrace and related to Anatolian Cabela, as well as the Haplodamos and his Gigantes, and the Curete Enitos, Curete Enitos. So, what does all that mean? What this is saying is there are figures all around Greece that seem to follow this pattern, okay? And again, back up here. Sometimes 3 of them, sometimes 5 of them, sometimes 9, sometimes 7. So different numerologies, but a very similar story where there's these war dancers that protect the infant God. When the mother of God gives birth to God, think of it like, Mother Mary giving birth to baby Jesus, the war dancers, the dactyls, the curetes, the hand of divinity protects them. The male hand of divinity protects them. One of the curetes, Pyrrhikos, related to the name fire, by the way, was sometimes identified with Selenos, the elderly satyr companion of Dionysus. Selenos is a male moon god. In Iron Age Greece, they have a moon goddess, Selena. Selenos is a male moon god. So, a male fire figure related to the moon. So, just think about that. Because in Iron Age Greece, the moon is female and the sun is male. This is showing us possibly a flip of that gender role. Another Melisaeus appears to have been connected with Aristeos, discoverer of honey. And remember, it said up here they were related with beekeeping. Okay, so we just get these repeating images, right? So beekeeping, honey. The dactyloi were occasionally identified with the Telchines of Rhodes. Just another form of this story. Nonnus in his Dionysica lists 2 of the Telchines, Damnameneus and Skelmis, which are names applied to dactyloi by Hesiod. Hesiod is our oldest source, so he's even older than Homer. And we actually have more of his writings intact from his time. A lot of Homer's writings are actually fragments, and we don't get a full version until later. But Hesiod's Theogony, we have a very early version of it. And so again, this shows that while other characters bear these names, so the Telchines in later writings, Dionysica is 5th century AD, I believe. So these are later writings and a later group called the Telchines on Rhodes, but the names are related to these older versions, the finger versions. And the dactyloi are sometimes said to be fathers of all these other versions. So again, multiple layers of the mythology confirm that the dactyls are the originals. They and their numerology of 5 fingers, that is the original, that would appear to be the original and oldest version of this tale. So the family of the curetes and dactyls. So we have Gaia, obviously the Earth Mother. That's a later source, Dionysica, 5th century. We got some Homeric fragments and Strabo mentioning Hecateros. We have Argonautica, Anchiale. The Argonautica contains the most complete version of the dactyl myth. That's around 3rd century BC. Although we do see the dactyls and other characters from the Argonautica in much older pottery scenes and frescoes. So we know the myth is very old. It isn't invented in the Argonautica. The Argonautica is just our oldest surviving complete version of the tale. But the events that happened in that legend appear much, much older. And then, so some link Hecateros and Anchiale. Theoi puts a question mark here. I believe Hecateros in the Homeric fragments, his wife is mentioned, but her name isn't mentioned. But then Argonautica says Anchiale, so then, okay, Hecateros and Anchiale, or is it Gaia and Anchiale? Or, sorry, Gaia and Hecateros, or is Gaia also Anchiale the same thing? Anchiale is a nymph of Ida. Gaia is the Mother Earth. Anchiale goes into the cave on Mount Dicte to give birth to the Idaean dactyls. So again, Mount Dicte and Mount Ida both mentioned in their legend. These are mountains where you go into the earth, into the belly of Gaia, the womb of Gaia, the womb of the earth. Hecateros is an interesting guy. He's related to this finger dance. So Hecateros was the demigod of the Hecateris, a rustic dance of quickly moving hands. So back to that creation myth, the dactyls and the Hecatarides, born of the hands of the nymph of Ida when she squats in the cave, presumably to give birth to God. Moving hands. And perhaps also of the skill of hands in general. He was the father of 10 children by a daughter of the first man for Aeneas, the 5 dactylois, and the 5 Hecatarides, so fingers and moving hands. His daughters were the mothers of the Curates, Saturoi, and Oreades. Okay, so just to give you, a little bit of background on him, and then we'll touch on Anchiale as well. Was the Titan goddess of the warming heat of fire. She was wife of Hecateros, Titan god of hands, and the mother of the metalworking dactyloi, the fingers. These rustic deities together represented the power of the human hand to create and utilize fire. Anchiale's brother, Prometheus, famously stole fire from heaven for man. So related to fire, her name translates possibly as revealing warmth. And so she is mother of these finger men and finger women, representing the power of the human hand to create and utilize fire, or possibly another way of looking at it, the hands of divinity to wield light. Remember, these characters are related to the moon and to the sun. And then we have Anchiale's brother Prometheus. He steals fire against the wishes of Zeus and gives it to man. So fire being like, it's light, right? It banishes darkness. It reveals the unknown. It's a symbol of wisdom. So man is given fire, is given wisdom by Prometheus against the wishes of Zeus. Zeus did not think we were worthy of wisdom. Very similar to the biblical tale in Genesis where God tells Adam and Eve, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. You're not ready for that. Okay, God does not believe we are ready for knowledge. Parents of the Curates, some versions Uranus and Gaia, others a shower of rain and Gaia, others just Gaia. The Hecatarides are parents of Curates in some versions, because remember the Curates are sometimes said to be the dactyls, which would be the husbands of the Hecatarides, the brother husbands. But in other versions, the Curates are the children of the dactyls and Hecatarides. So parents of the Curates, again, this seems to be the most common or the original version, dactyls and Hecatarides. Some say it's just the dactyls. Others say it was Kronos that was a parent of the Curates or dactyls, if you want to call them that. And that's a very interesting thing because the dactyls defend Zeus, the infant Zeus, against Kronos. So again, we have this idea of the body of divinity turning against the head of divinity. Kronos is the head of divinity before Zeus. Rhea, the hearth of divinity, gives birth to a new god, and the hands of divinity protect that god. And this is where we should talk more about the Hecatarides, I think. The Hecatarides, in my opinion, might be related to Hecate. Now, a lot of people think Hecate, the common explanation in modern times is that Hecate is an Anatolian deity that came to Greece in the Iron Age, maybe around the 6th century BC. But that seems unlikely to me. The reason that is assumed, and it is just an assumption, but the reason that is assumed is because that's when the Temple of Hecate in Lycia is built, and a lot of the people that we find in writing from that region of Anatolia, they often have names that are related to Hecate, like Hecateros or Hecatera. So men and women that are named after Hecate, or presumably after Hecate, maybe after Hecateros or the Hecaterides. Okay, but because of this prominence of Hecate's cult at this earliest known temple of Hecate, the assumption has always been that that was where she was originated from. But she's tied with the goddess Rhea, and so in the Cretan and Greek version of the birth of Zeus, it's the dactyls, the male hands, that guard the infant Zeus, while Rhea feeds Kronos the Omphalos stone. She wraps a stone up in swaddling cloth and feeds it to Kronos. Kronos thinks, oh, I've devoured Zeus, I'm safe. And just to recap for anyone that missed my previous video on the Idaean dactyls and the birth of Zeus myth, the Omphalos stone seems to be a betel stone of Kronos. A betel stone was the sacred stone that housed a divinity in Near Eastern religions. So this would have been the house of Kronos. So feeding him the betel stone, or the Omphalos stone, you're feeding him his own house. Kronos eats his own children. He eats his own house. And as I mentioned in that video as well, Kronos is related to the city of Byblos. The city of Byblos did have betel worship. They worshipped deities that lived within a stone. In the Lycian version of this tale, it is Hecate that goes to Kronos with the Omphalos stone. But remember, so the dactyls are said to be 5, the Curetes and other versions of this tale are said to be 3. Hecate is a Trinitarian goddess. Okay, she is 3-formed. But the Hecaterides are 5-formed. So you have one version of the tale where the 3 Curetes guard Zeus while the Trinitarian 3-formed goddess Hecate feeds Kronos the Omphalos stone. Then you have another version of the tale where the 5 dactyls guard Zeus and Rhea feeds him the Omphalos stone, but it may have been the Hecaterides in some versions that fed the Omphalos stone. So the female hand of divinity seduces, manipulates, deceives Kronos. So the male hand is hard power. They perform the war dance and guard the infant Zeus. The female hand is the soft power, seduction, deception. Manipulates Kronos into a false sense of security. So this actually may be the origin of Hecate, a 5-formed deity. And we know from Mesopotamian archaeology that the earliest form of the moon was not a 3-formed moon. In modern times, we think of the 3 phases of the moon: the waxing moon, the waning moon, and the full moon. But in Mesopotamia, it was 5 stages. So it was those 3 stages: waxing, waning, and full. But it also had the new moon, the moon in darkness, and the first sliver of light when the moon exits the new moon phase. So when the darkness is first banished, that very first sliver of light was made its own stage. That was the most sacred stage of the moon. It was the rebirth of the moon's light. So that 5 stage of the moon, that's much older. That goes back to the first writing, like 3000 BC. So this Hecaterides, this 5 form of the female, it's the female hand of divinity, possibly tied with the moon the way Hecate is, but not 3-formed, 5-formed. So the Hecaterides, let's talk about them some more. This translates as dance of the moving hands. I could also translate it from Heka, which is 100. So the 5 of the 100, she of the 100 or they of the 100. The Hecaterides were 5 nymphs of the rustic dance. They were sisters of the Dactyloi and mothers of the Satyrai, Oreades, and Curetes. Remember, the Curetes in some version are the first 100 Cretan men. Their name was associated with 2 words: Hecateris, a country dance involving the moving of hands. So imagine this gives us insight into ancient Minoan rituals where they would dance with their hands. And when you look at Minoan art, especially late Minoan art, you see these hands appear over and over and over again. All these goddesses holding up their hands. And this gives us insight into what that might mean. Even though these myths come to us from the Iron Age, they are clearly set in the Bronze Age, and they relate to what we find in archaeology from the Bronze Age. It's really powerful stuff. Okay, if you're not reading the myths, you're missing out. Okay, it really gives insight into the archaeology, in my opinion. So Hecateros, a country dance involving the moving of hands, and Hecateros, a high leaping country dance in which the feet were kicked high towards the buttocks. The two words were probably derived from either Heka and Teres, meaning marvelous hundred, or Hecateros, each of two. So one of the alternate versions of the dactyls is that they may be 5 sets of twins. And that's also something that we see in Minoan art, where we see 10 men arranged around a female figure in 5 sets of 2. So 5 sets of twins. So Hecateros, each of 2, is another alternate translation of this. The 5 sisters and 5 brothers were known collectively as dactyloi, fingers, for their number corresponding with the 10 fingers of the hands. And also Hecaterides, marvelous 100, for as a group they were endowed with 100 fingers, 10 sets of 10 fingers. Again, it's possibly related to this creation myth about the first 100 Cretans. The male and female dactyloi were joined in marriage, finger to finger, like the harmonious folding of the hands, and from their union were born the Satyroi, Oreades, and dancing Curetes. The Curetes were the protectors of Zeus and or the first human tribe of the island of Crete, while the Oreades were nymphs of the mountain forests. The Hecaterides were probably identified with the Meliaea, sister wives of the Curetes, and the Nymphae Cabirides, so the Cabiroi, orgiastic goddesses of the Samothracian mysteries. Samothrace is a very interesting place. It's a temple complex, very ancient temple complex, said to house the pantheon of the great gods who ruled before Zeus. They ruled the Aegean before Zeus. Okay, and there's a goddess there named Zerinthia, which is related to Hecate. Okay, so the Iron Age Greeks call Zerinthia Hecate. They say they are the same being. So again, we get the idea that Hecate did not come to the Aegean in the Iron Age. She is likely far older. She's tied with Rhea, who's the mother goddess associated with Crete. Okay, Minoan era Crete. Hecate is also associated with the Anatolian goddess Cybele, which is also associated with Rhea. Cybele also lives on Mount Ida, although it's a different Mount Ida. It's one in Anatolia, not on Crete. But again, it's like, we find Cybele, this is another deity that is said to come to Greece in the Iron Age. We have long thought that Cybele came to Greece in the Iron Age. Well, we now know that's not true. We find Cybele's name in Linear A tablets. These are Bronze Age, Minoan era tablets. Cybele, and probably this related deity Hecate, most likely did not come in the Iron Age. They were most likely there from the Bronze Age, possibly even earlier. The site at Samothraki, or Samothrace, that site dates back to the Neolithic. So, and we also, to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, we can trace the genetics out of ancient Byblos. We can trace the migration of the first farmers out of ancient Byblos into the Anatolian peninsula and then into the Aegean. We can trace the pottery out of Byblos into Anatolia, into Greece. Okay? The goddess of Byblos was identified with Isis and Hathor by the Egyptians themselves. Okay, we have that in Egyptian writing. So the earliest writing from this region. And Hathor is the hand of Atum. So we have the goddess of Byblos being the hand of God, the hand of divinity. And then we have it coming in to the Aegean in the ancient past, and at least by the Bronze Age, we could say with confidence that these traditions were there. Okay, this hand of divinity, in this case, a male and female hand of divinity, are there in the Aegean in the most ancient days. Anyways, back to so their name also suggests some connection with Hecate, an important goddess of the mysteries. Yeah, so I would say Hecate is not an Iron Age goddess. She is a Bronze Age goddess. And instead of this translation here as worker from afar, I would say she is she of the 100. If she's the Hecatarides, she is mother of the first 100 Cretans. She's the hand of divinity. She's the hand of Rhea. Okay? She's the hand of the mother goddess when the mother goddess, touches earth, when she manipulates the earth, when she lays her hands on the earth to perform that act of creation, the female hand is Hecate. Okay? And she mothers the first Cretan men, the first 100. Hecate and Cybele or Rhea, under different names. Okay? These deities are related to the Minoan creation myth. In my earlier video on Hecate, the origins of Hecate, I think I ruffled some feathers with some of the Hecate worshippers. A lot of people just assume she's, Iron Age, but clearly that's not the case. In fact, just to flesh this out one little bit more, if you look, Theo is great. It provides a lot of the sources directly. If you look, her earliest mentions are going to be, in Hesiod's Theogony, 8th or 7th century BC. So that's exactly when writing returns to Greece. Okay, it kind of dies out at the end of the Bronze Age. There's a Dark Age. Writing doesn't totally go away, but it mostly recedes from most regions in Greece. And it doesn't come back until right here. And that's exactly when we get the first written evidence for this deity. It's also when we get the first written evidence for the Hecatarides. Again, Hesiod, 8th to 7th century BC. So you have this goddess Hecate and this earlier 5 figures of Hecatarides linked in the legends of the birth of Zeus. Okay, both of these figures may play a role in that. Hecate certainly does. Hecatarides probably did. They're the female counterparts to the dactyls and the Curites. So, you see this evolution of the numerology from 5 to 3. Sorry, I've been getting sick the past couple days, and this is day 2 of recording, and I'm even sicker than yesterday. But the point is, you have this deity related to the birth of God, related to a creation myth. And then the Hecatarides are identified with the Meliaea, which I already said, and I mentioned, they're at the top of the Argive family tree. That is the genealogy that contains the Cretan kings. Okay, that's the genealogy that contains the Danaans, which is another name that Homer gives to the ancient Greeks. He calls them Achaeans and Danaans. The Achaeans show up in the Hellenic family tree. The Danaans show up in the Argive family tree. So Homer is telling us of the 2 types of Greeks. Okay? Indo-Europeans coming from the north, and this earlier, most likely Afro-Asiatic, in my opinion, this earlier population of the Aegean, related to Crete, related to Bronze Age Crete and the Minoans. And the fact that these figures are at the top of the family tree, they're related to the birth of Zeus, meaning they're older than Zeus. Okay? Hecate and the Hecatarides are there when Zeus is a baby. Okay? They're there when Zeus is born. So they're older than Zeus. And that's what it's, creation myths evolve slowly. Think of our creation myth. I mean, in modern times, we're more secular. We don't really believe in, a literal creation myth, but we still tell the story of Adam and Eve. This story is thousands of years old. It wasn't invented 20 years ago. Creation myths take a long time to form, and they stay for a long time. So you're telling me that these figures that are said to be older than Zeus, that are there when the first writing begins as already established deities, you're telling me that couldn't have been earlier than the 8th century because that's our first written evidence. Look, I acknowledge that's our first written evidence, but they must be older. We can argue how much older, but if they're related to this finger dance and this hand creation myth, hand of divinity, that's at least Bronze Age. You can see that in the archaeology. A lot of people just poo-poo mythology. They say it's worthless. but it's not, okay? When you have genetics and archaeology and mythology all in alignment, all pointing in the same direction, that's powerful. You can't tell me that that's meaningless. You can't tell me there's nothing to that. But, okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. I've made my point about Hecate and the Hecatarides. Okay, I think they're older. Okay, and I think Rhea and all of this creation myth, I think this is old. Yes, it's written down in the Iron Age, but it's clearly much older. So, but that's the female hand. Let's go back to the dactyls. Because I talked about this in one of my other videos on the dactyl specifically. But I want to flesh out this idea as well. So we are given the names of the dactyls. And again, sometimes here we're given 4 names, here we're given 2. These different sources, right? Here's only one name. And some of these names repeat over and over. Kelmis or Skelmis. Okay, that's a name that shows up a lot. Damnameneus. That's it. Or Damneus down here. So forms of this name, right? And so here we're given 7 names of the dactyls. So again, sometimes there's 7 of these. Pyrrhicos, we already talked about him. Here we're given 3 names. And then here we go. Strabo and Diodorus Siculus say Heracles was a dactyl. Hercules. That's the Greek name for Hercules. Hercules was a dactyl. Okay? In one early form. Okay? And in another, Pausanias, he gives us 4 names. Heracles and then 3 of the finger brothers, Paeoneus, Iasios, and Idas. Iasios, that's interesting. That's a form of the name Jason. And Hercules goes with Jason and the Argonauts. How many Argonauts are there? 50. So in this creation myth of the first 100, it is often portrayed as 50 sons and 50 daughters. Sometimes it's 100 sons and 100 daughters, but it's usually 50-50. So you've got Hercules and the Argonauts. Remember, the Argonautica is the earliest complete telling of the Idaean dactyl myth. And in this legend, Hercules and Iasos, or Iason, Jason, okay, these are 2 of the fingers of the dactyls, and they lead 50 Argonauts on their voyage. And wait, what's with the ship? It's got Hera carved into the back of the ship, watching over the crew. The goddess is the body of divinity. Do you understand? And they are the hands and the descendants of the hands. In this case, it's only the male half, okay? But you have the male hand of divinity riding on the body of the goddess. That's what the ship represents, okay? This goes back to Minoan mythology. It predates Greece. And it's found in all of these tales. How many sons did King Priam have? 50 sons. What I mentioned the Danaans earlier. What's the story of the creation myth of the Danaans? How do they say their tribe came about? Well, Danaus had 50 daughters. Danaus was battling his brother Aegyptus, who had 50 sons. Okay, and then the children of those 50 and 50. The women murdered the husbands, but one of the husbands survived. And then so the children of that guy, they go on to be the Danaans. So 50-50, 100. Okay, this legend, the hands of divinity, the finger men and finger women, the first 100 people, sometimes 50 men, 50 women, sometimes 100 men, 100 women. This framework of myth goes over and over and over again, found everywhere in this in Greek mythology. And then Hercules, okay, Hercules the dactyl, okay. Hercules was the leader of the Dactyloi, 5 daimones who founded the Olympic Games in the age of Kronos. He and his brothers were probably more specifically connected with the race in armor, one of the oldest Olympic events. Like the Kurites, the Dactyloi were depicted as armored youths. So this war dance, okay? The Dactylos Hercules, was identified with the hero of the same name, Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, who eventually superseded him as the reputed founder of the Olympic Games. And So, I mean, we're talking, Hercules was one of the most prominent figures, and I'm not the first person to suspect that Hercules might have origins in a pre-Greek figure. This has been suspected by many historians and archaeologists and mythographers and people who just study this, because he has so many strange connections, okay? And let's just say what Diodorus Siculus has to say. And writers tell us that one of them, the Dactyloi, was named Heracles, okay? And excelling as he did in fame, he established the Olympic Games, and that the men of a later period thought, because the name was the same, that this was the son of Alcmene, i.e. the Heracles of the 12 Labors, who had founded the institution of the Olympic Games. And evidence of this, they tell us, are found in the fact that many women, even to this day, take their incantations from this god and make amulets in his name, on the ground that he was a wizard and practiced the arts of initiatory rites. But they add that these things were indeed very far removed from the habits of the Hercules who was born of Alcmene. So even back then they're confused. Is this dactyl Hercules the same as our Hercules? Because he's so different. He's a wizard. He's magic. Because that's the form of the dactyls. They're magicians. They're the magic of divinity when divinity lays its hand on the earth. Okay? They're confused because it's like, well, some people say they're the same, but they're so different. And he's even saying, look, these things are indeed, confusing. But they're connected with the games. It's like they're two different characters, one in a pre-Greek tradition and then one in the Greek tradition. And here we go. The Thespiaea, a town in Boeotia. At Thespiaea is also a sanctuary of Heracles. The priestess there is a virgin who acts as such until she dies. As a matter of fact, the sanctuary seemed to me too old to be of the time of Heracles, the son of Amphitryon, and to belong to Heracles, called one of the dactyloi Idaioi, the Idaean fingers, the fingers of Ida, to whom I found the people of Erythrae in Ionia and the Phoenician Tyre possessed sanctuaries. Remember, Byblos is in what the Greeks would have considered Phoenicia, okay? So we're talking about the Greeks of the Iron Age recognized this older finger version of Hercules and connected him with the East, i.e. the Phoenician god Melkart, who is identified with Heracles. Very similar guy, okay? Hercules' first labor is to kill a lion and wear its skin. Melkart does the same thing. He battles a lion. Okay, these are very ancient myths. Egypt, at their first capital of Memphis, they talk about the Son of God with a lion's head. Okay, so this Hercules legend is a lot older, just in a very different form, but it's a lot older than people realize. So nevertheless, the Boeotians were not unacquainted with this name of Heracles, seeing as they themselves say that the sanctuary of Demeter has been entrusted to the Dactyloi Idaioi, so the Earth Mother. Again, born in a cave of the earth, okay? The fingers of Ida. And just remember the Thespiaea. We also have the story of Hercules and the 50 sons of King Thespius. Hercules comes to the king of Thespius. Thespius has 50 daughters, okay? He says, Hercules, I want to have grandsons by your great and strong line, okay? He says, rid this land of a lion. Again, back to this lion myth. And in so doing, Hercules fathers 50 sons by the daughters of Thespius, okay? 50 sons, 50 daughters, do you understand? It's the same numerology. Repeat it again, okay? Hercules, in another myth, also slaughters his family. He's driven into madness by the goddess Hera, okay? And he slaughters his family, his first family. He has to go get a new wife. The whole point of the 12 labors is that he has to repent of the sin of murdering his old family. He gets a new wife, he gets a new family by the end of it. All is forgiven, right? Well, but that's a very dark story. What is this about the great hero of Greece murdering his old family? Well, I put it to you that perhaps the Greeks understood that Hercules used to be in a different form in the very distant past, belonging to a very different tradition, this Idaean Dactyloi tradition, this Minoan era tradition, this Argive tradition. And this story of him slaughtering his family and then having a new family, That is the story of the passing of the torch from one tradition to the next, from one form of Hercules to the one that we know today. So, again, Hercules, Hecate, Rhea, Cybele, these are all far older deities than people realize. They're connected with far older stories than people realize. These mythological connections show up too often for them to have just appeared, poofed into existence in the 8th century BC. The fact that all of these stories are already well developed and spread all over Greece in various different forms at the beginning of writing coming to the Aegean, that should tell you that they didn't just poof into existence in the 8th century. They had already been spreading for centuries, probably millennia, in various different forms under various different names. But it's something to think about. Join me next time and we'll talk more about ancient history.